Today we're going to be talking about the concept of attainment model, and we're going to move on. First, we're going to talk about an overview of what I really want you to get out of this presentation. The main things that I really hope you learn today from this presentation, what you're going to be going through with me, is first, what is the concept of attainment model? Second, how to use it in your classroom. Third and finally, what are the pros and cons of it? And finally, I'm going to leave you with some discussion questions that I really hope you'll answer on Blackboard. So first, we're going to look at the keys to the concept of attainment theory and why you would use it in your classroom. So to better understand this model, first we'll look at what concept of attainment is. Concept attainment model is an indirect instructional strategy that uses a structured inquiry process. This is the definition that was given to us off of the website that was provided for us on Blackboard. I thought it was the best one because it explained what exactly the concept attainment model is. So moving on to why would you actually use this model? There are a lot of different reasons why I can think you'd use this model, and we'll go more into that in the pros and cons. But the majority of the reason why you would use this model is that it's really keen into students learning the idea behind the concept rather than just simply learning a definition. If you read through each one of these examples, it really does tell you that these teaches the students the concept rather than and teaches them examples rather than just learning a book definition. Ultimately, I don't know about most of y'all, but in my education experience and what I've seen from observing in classrooms, most of the time I don't hear students or even remember myself saying a dictionary definition or a book definition for something. Instead, I can remember thinking, oh, this is related to this. So that's why concept attainment model is such a good model to use whenever teaching, because it really does allow students to click and remember examples whenever they're tested on them or have to recall them at an instant. So moving on to how to actually use this model. First, we're going to look at some of the key terms that you're going to hear me using, and if you read up more on this theory yourself, that you would hear concept and abstract notion, critical attributes. That would be those characteristics, those things that students really actually relate to a concept that really come from the definition. Positive examples and negative examples, what are and what aren't a part of this concept, conjunctive concepts, concepts that can be closely related to the concept, and disjunctive concepts, those that aren't too closely related to the concept, but sometimes get mistaken. So moving on to steps to implementing this. First thing you're going to have to do whenever you choose to implement this as a lesson plan is choose a concept. This needs to be those abstract ideas. This can't be something too close. For example, whenever I was reading up on it, I saw that one thing you could do is war, as opposed to civil war. You really want to make sure this is a broad term that students really need to grasp. Second, you're going to pick 2 to 3 attributes to illustrate to students what exactly this concept is. Those are those definitional words that they can remember. For example, whenever I was looking through, I saw one about a 7th grade science teacher using this to teach insects. Her attributes were the 3 body parts and the 6 legs. Then provide students with both positive and negative examples. You don't just want to provide students with positive examples because then they won't really know what it isn't, and also you don't want to provide them with just negative examples because they'll get overwhelmed and think, does anything actually fit this? Fourth and finally, you really want to encourage discussion. Let a student or students really provide their own examples and explain to you what they think demonstrates this concept. Also, it allows you to understand if students are grasping this or if you need to redirect when possible and explain why that would be a negative example. And then finally, if you have conjunctive or disjunctive concepts, you can really explain them during this last part of the time of your lesson. So now moving on to an example that I chose to use. I personally chose an English example because that's one of my stronger suits, and the concept I chose is a simile. The 3 critical attributes that I chose that I think everybody needs to know about a simile is, first, it's a comparison between 2 objects or ideas. Second, those objects are usually unrelated, unless of course you really don't know how to make a simile. And then third and finally, this one must state like or as. Some examples that you could have up on a board, on your T-chart, on your smart board. I think a smart board would be a really great way to use this. You could have the words and have students matching them to positive and negative examples, or you could have flashcards. There's a lot of different ways to do this, but my positive examples were her lips were as red as a rose. The cat darted across the room like a flash of lightning. Something that really has those students realizing that the word like and as is in there, and that these ideas are unrelated. Some of the negative examples are like just basic sentences. The cat was fast. The house is a cluttered junkyard. That's more of a metaphor than a simile because it doesn't have like or as, and the figure skating is ballet on ice. Once again, that's more of a metaphor. Notice how whenever I talk about the conjunctive ideas, you can bring in metaphor, which is why I chose those as my negative examples, because I feel like it would be a really good way to lead into that and be like, well, when you're comparing two unlike ideas but not using like or as, you're making a metaphor, not a simile. And then finally, I would open it up to discussion, possibly let my students join into groups and let them each think of some and give me some feedback and make sure that they really are grasping this idea of a simile before we move on. So now, we need to understand why exactly would you want to use concept attainment model, and are there any downsides to it? Because it seems pretty great. So here's some of the pros of using the concept attainment model. There's a variety of uses. You've already kind of heard me talk about this. You can use it in a large lecture setting where you're presenting the model, or you can do it in small groups where you're talking with like 4 to 5 students and reinforcing the ideas, or this can even be used on one-on-one instruction. Think about like whenever you're in your tutorial time and you're trying to really make sure that a student's grasping something. You could have the note card idea that I talked about and like make them pair it up for positive and negative examples, or do a T-chart. These would be really great ideas of why this is such a versatile concept that doesn't have to be used in just one setting. The second reason why it's a pro is it facilitates discussion. This isn't something that you're just going to stand up there and lecture. You really need student involvement whenever you're talking about this. Also, it's really good because students can build off of each other's ideas and really are able to relate to each other, and you can see the strong suits that students have. The third and final reason why this is a really good model to use is it has a higher retention rate for students. I talked about this earlier in my personal experience in watching classrooms during my observations, is that students really seem to remember those key attributes like from definitional type words rather than just the whole definition. So they learn how to sort out that irrelevant information that comes from a definition. So not only can the skill really be applied to what you're talking about right now, but it also can be applied to whenever they're just reading definitions from their book. All of a sudden they're going to be picking up on the keywords, and this is important, which is a really important skill not only to have in education but also in just day-to-day life. So ultimately it allows students to have higher retention. Not only does it do that because it helps them sort out their relevant information, it also gives them more than one example. They have to think of their own examples. They listen to their classmates' examples. I know most of the time I end up remembering things, or students end up remembering things because they heard somebody else say it or they heard themselves say it. So ultimately that's a really good reason for why we should use this model. But like with everything, there are some cons to using this model. The first time of this con is it's very time consuming. Because this is set up where it is a discussion and you have to go back and forth to make sure students are understanding it. It is a huge time constraint to make sure that every student has somewhat of an understanding of the concept you're going for. That's why it's usually used as an introductory lesson, because then you can go back and reinforce what's been learned. The next reason why this can have a con is sometimes there's a little discovery. Not all students are going to connect with this concept, and they're not going to be able to retain everything, especially if they don't really have like a personal reason. Like a student that doesn't really understand these vague ideas of a simile, this may not be the best option for them because they may not understand how to relate those two unlike concepts to each other. You may need to go back and reteach and reinforce these ideas so that those students don't get left behind. The next reason is that sometimes it can be ineffective. Like I talked about, those other two cons can make this drill a little bit ineffective. Because once again, it depends on the class and how they're working together and how they're feeding off each other. I know that I saw one of my teachers that I observed do this sort of thing, and the class just sat there silent because none of them knew of any of their own examples. And ultimately, if the class isn't getting anything out of it, then it's really ineffective. The next thing I would like to move on to is some discussion of some things I'd like y'all to talk about possibly on Blackboard. First question. Why do you think it's beneficial to use concept attainment? Like, I know I listed some of the pros, but do you think that there's some reason why this should be preferred over any other method? Also, do you think there should be a reason why we should use it? The second one. After using concept attainment, how would you reinforce these ideas? Like, basically, what would be your follow-up lesson to make sure that students understand this? Because clearly, like I said, it can be ineffective at times, so you want to make sure that students really grasp the concept. So what would you as a teacher use? The next thing is, do you think there are some subject areas that benefit from concept attainment more than others? I mean, I showed two examples from English and speech, English and science, but do you personally think that there are some subject areas that this is better fit for, or maybe that would be more well equipped for? And then my final question is, what advice to a teacher trying to implement, what would be your advice? Like, what would you tell them? What would be the key? Like, if you were to give them 3 keys to having successful concept attainment theories, what would you tell them? I know for me, it would be definitely having that vague concept, having really great attributes, and finally having strong examples. Ultimately, what would you think a teacher has to know to have a positive implementation of this theory? Finally, this is my reference sheet if you want to see where I went and got my stuff. And I really appreciate you all listening to me today, and I hope you got something out of this.